Good morning. The subcommittee will come to order. Before we proceed, I ask unanimous consent that Representative Luttrell be permitted to participate in the hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I want to welcome our witnesses to discuss VA cybersecurity. The healthcare industry is in a constant target and frequent victim of cyber attacks. That includes the VA. According to the Department of Health and Human Services, over 519 million health records have been exposed in data breaches over the last 15 years. Last year, there were on average 2 data breaches every day exposing 500 or more medical records. And just one cyber attack on Change Healthcare exposed over 100 million American records. Some of them are veterans. Basic math tells us that many of the people in this room or watching in this hearing have had their healthcare data stolen by a cyber criminal. Unfortunately, these crimes are profitable and they are becoming more sophisticated. We have a special responsibility to protect the billions of medical, personal, and financial records that the VA and their contractors hold for millions of veterans and their family members. No organization that is connected to the internet is ever completely safe from cyber attacks. But we expect the VA to understand their vulnerabilities and maintain every possible defense. And when breaches happen, we expect the VA to detect them immediately, contain the damage, and to notify the affected individuals. Congress has consistently provided the cybersecurity resources that the VA has requested. The Office of Information and Technology budget is roughly flat this year overall, but cybersecurity is slated for a $110 million increase to $707 million. Today, we're going to review whether those resources are being used effectively. According to the VA's Office of Inspector General, improvements in cybersecurity have been painfully slow. OIG's Federal Information Security Modernization Act, FISMA, audit repeats most of the same findings year after year. VA has been aware of some of these deficiencies for years, but unable or unwilling to fix them. In the most recent FISMA report for 2023, OIG's auditor made 25 recommendations, and Mr. DelBene disputed 10 of them. I want to understand the disagreements and make sure the vulnerabilities are being addressed and not swept under the rug. We will also review the MITRE Corporation cybersecurity assessment of key VA systems. Congress commissioned MITRE to do this assessment in the Strengthening VA Cybersecurity Act of 2022 to look deeper than the FISMA audit. MITRE uncovered a whole host of problems. So many problems, apparently, that the VA withheld the report from the committee until I personally got involved and was able to obtain access after discussions with Secretary McDonough. I absolutely understand the sensitivity of this information. That's inherent to the subject matter that we discuss on this panel. While I have no intention of discussing the specific vulnerabilities in the public forum, I want to reiterate that security is no excuse for avoiding accountability. I will leave it to Mr. Powner from MITRE to summarize his report and his findings appropriately. In short, the report found that despite some incremental improvements, VA's cybersecurity approach remains inadequate and unfocused. There are gaps in governance, processes, communication, and staffing. Cutting-edge cybersecurity tools are not configured properly, and too many aspects of the department's cyber incident responses remain manual. And the rapid, uncoordinated expansion of cloud computing has created cybersecurity gaps. Mr. DelBene and his team have a great deal of work to do to close out MITRE's findings. Finally, I want to review VA's progress to reach a zero-trust cybersecurity posture. Zero trust means no user or system is trusted by default. Instead, everyone must be authenticated. Experts have described zero trust as a never-ending journey and a constant evolution. That may be true, but I expect it to produce tangible benefits that protect veterans' data along the way. We can't tell if we have a bad actor accessing our systems if we don't know who the good actors are that are accessing our systems. And we don't have a good accounting there. This cannot be another governmental perpetual motion machine that the contractors use to contract an unending flow of taxpayers' dollars. We need to see results and ensure accountability for everyone involved. We need to know what specific measurable goals that the VA is working on today that will make veterans' data safer tomorrow. With that, I would yield to the ranking member, Sherrill McCormick, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Representing just 0.52% of VA's total discretionary budget request for FY25, cybersecurity underpins virtually every program we discuss in our committee and most of what VA does for our nation's veterans. VA's cybersecurity program, despite consistent yet meager increases in funding, remains unable to adequately address many systemic issues that plague many of VA's efforts. I'm hopeful that this hearing will support impactful conversation on how to support VA in a proactive effort against cybersecurity threats facing our veterans today. To achieve this, cybersecurity must become, as a whole, a VA concern, from its patients and its employees to its contractors and government partners, and even the American public. Veterans represent a pillar of American democracy for many, making them open to additional threats from those that seek to sow discord and gain access to the U.S. system. As such, cybersecurity must be on the forefront for all veterans' minds. For example, claim sharks are shady individuals or companies that illegally charge fees for assisting veterans in filing their VA benefit claims have been known to request login credentials to access veterans' personal identifiable information, PIIs, or protected healthcare information, PHIs. For any veteran listening today, you should never give your credentials to any of these scam artists. If they're an accredited representative, they would have their own access to the VA system. Also, phishing attempts like impersonating official VA communications are another way that our adversaries may seek to gain access to veterans' PII, PHI, or financial information in order to fabricate credentials, collecting benefits, or committing fraud in the veteran's name. Cyber threats are not just challenges that the VA and the veterans must consider. VA's contractors and community care partners are increasingly targeted as well, placing secondhand threats on the VA. In February of 2024, Change Healthcare, a vendor that VA uses for many billing and payment purposes, was breached, exposing over 100 million people's PII. While Change and its parent company, Optum, certified that no VA-related data was lost, the breach certainly raised questions on the security of the VA system, particularly where third-party companies transmit, store, or utilize veterans' data. Both the FY23 Federal Information Security Management Act, FISMA, audit, and the MITRE's independent assessment, which was mandated by the Strengthening VA Cybersecurity Act of 2022, have identified deficiencies in VA's process for ensuring that adequate protections are in place on contractor systems. In fact, these are recommendations that have persisted for at least the past 5 reports without an update. It's time that cybersecurity standards of the VA's contractors are as much as a focus as the others of the VA's internal system. VA must take a holistic approach to its cyber improvement, especially when a veteran's data is at play. In this holistic approach and tenuous budget environment, I look forward to hearing how VA might explore partnerships between key entities like the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency and the Department of Health and Human Services that may be able to bridge possible gaps across the VA enterprise. Utilizing resources from agencies whose mission is dedicated to assessing, monitoring, and distributing best practices around countering cyber-based threats allows VA to maintain its focus on what VA does best, serving our nation's veterans. To that matter, VA cybersecurity assessment I greatly appreciate the level of transparency that the VA has offered this committee. However, I believe these conversations around VA cybersecurity needs must be happening earlier and much more often. Allowing Congress a detailed view when possible will allow us authorizers and the appropriators and a view into the real state of cybersecurity and IT at the VA. On the flip side, Congress needs to be realistic about these needs and what it will cost to implement them effectively. If Congress is not open to fully funding these solutions, then we are complicit in the cybersecurity risks facing the VA and our veterans. Ultimately, cyber attacks are less of a matter of if, but when. With less and less resources allocated to the IT and cyber networks across the federal government, VA and its patients stand to suffer much more than just bad press and a slap on the wrist from Congress. While this is not our last hearing of the Congress, I appreciate Chairman Rosendale for bringing this topic to our subcommittee today and want to thank him for his leadership in Congress. While we may not have agreed upon everything, I do believe this body has convened important conversation about VA's modernization efforts, and I look forward to continuing this work in the 119th Congress. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Sherrill-McCormick. I will now introduce the witnesses from our first and only panel. First, from the Department of Veterans Affairs, we have the Assistant Secretary for Information and Technology and Chief Information Officer, Mr. Kurt DelBene. We also have Ms. Lynette Sherrill, the Chief Information Security Officer, and Mr. Jeff Spaeth, the Executive Director of Information and Security Operations. Next, from the VA Office of Inspector General, we have Mr. Michael Bowman, the Director of Information Technology Security Division within the Office of Audits and Evaluations. Finally, from the MITRE Corporation, we have Mr. David Pauner, the Executive Director of the Center for Data-Driven Policy. I ask the witnesses to please stand and raise your right hands. Do you solemnly swear under penalty of perjury that the testimony you are about to provide is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you, and let the record reflect that all witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Mr. DelBene, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to deliver your opening statement on behalf of VA.
Dale, Ranking Member Sherrill-McCormick, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today and discuss VA's cybersecurity program and initiatives to protect veterans' security and information, data and VA information systems. I'm accompanied today by Deputy Assistant Secretary for Information Security and Chief Information Security Officer Lynette Sherrill, Deputy Chief Information Security Officer and Executive Director of Information Security Operations, Jeff Spaeth. I want to begin by thanking Congress and specifically the subcommittee for your continued interest and shared commitment to the success of VA's cybersecurity program. My top priority as CIO is supporting VA's mission to provide health services and benefits to veterans while safeguarding veteran data. Since my arrival, the department has focused on carrying out its core mission of caring for those who borne the battle while remaining vigilant in protecting veteran and employee information and VA assets. The department leverages sound cybersecurity practices to protect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of our information and information systems now and in the future. These practices include physical, technical, and administrative controls designed to protect equipment, manage asset, and enable cybersecurity professionals to monitor, detect, and respond to cyber threats. These controls are comparable to those deployed in the commercial sector. This testimony provides an overview of actions VA has taken to protect veteran data and the challenges we face and where resources can be best allocated. VA deploys a diverse set of cybersecurity capabilities that protect the department from threats. These cybersecurity capabilities include applications firewalls, intrusion detection and prevention systems, web application firewalls, email inspection and filtering, endpoint detection and response, traditional antivirus detection and prevention, web traffic decryption and inspection, enterprise predictive vulnerability scans, and forensics analysis. These, along with cybersecurity capabilities, constitute a strong defense-in-depth posture at the VA. Security excellence requires us to relentlessly evaluate and improve our cybersecurity programs. VA maintains system and information integrity through cybersecurity monitoring and reporting tools that constantly search for and identify abnormal traffic patterns. VA also maintains strong partnerships with OMB, CISA, HHS, DoD, and the FBI to leverage cybersecurity threat intelligence that flags potential compromises in adversarial tactics and techniques. Moreover, VA is leaning forward by adopting a zero-trust first approach to cybersecurity strategy and has made significant progress in implementing multi-factor authentication across our applications and network. Multi-factor authentication safeguards systems and user identities as part of our zero-trust strategy. VA is also addressing cyber vulnerabilities by conducting enterprise-wide audits of our IT systems. I maintain a strong relationship and partnership with the VA Inspector General and carefully consider FISMA recommendations to quickly identify vulnerabilities in VA systems and continuously improve VA's cybersecurity posture. Across these and other audits, to include the recent MITRE report, OIT is continually implementing remediations to combat the shifting and unprecedented threats a large healthcare system faces daily. Despite our efforts, we face recurring challenges, including budget limitations and recruitment and retention of highly qualified personnel. We have discussed our budgetary limitations in the past. Recruiting and retaining individuals with high-demand cybersecurity expertise is a top priority for OIT and industry leaders alike. For such employees, government salaries are too low to be competitive, even when combined with compensation incentives and benefits. As you know, we've implemented pay flexibilities for our technical talent to address some of this gap, but to successfully hire and retain high-demand cyber professionals, the entire federal government must take immediate steps to increase the salaries of GS 2210 workforce. VA recognizes the challenges of maturing a cybersecurity posture while improving access and services that veterans want and deserve. With the strategies, policies, and programs we have in place, the Department has risen to the challenge and continues in the mission to protect and secure the information of the services for our veterans. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and members of the Subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before the Subcommittee today to discuss one of VA's top priorities. I'm happy to respond to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DelBene. The written statement of Mr. DelBene will be entered into the hearing record. Mr. Bowman, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to deliver your opening statement on behalf of OIG.
Chairman Rosendale, Ranking Member Sherrill McCormick, and members of the Subcommittee. The Office of Inspector General appreciates your focus on our oversight of VA's IT security program. The OIG recognizes that managing VA's cybersecurity is an immensely difficult task. As the second largest federal agency, the complexity of VA's IT system presents a monumental data protection challenge. These systems are critical to provisioning the medical care and providing a range of benefits and services to millions of veterans. They also require VA to manage and provide secure access to a significant amounts of sensitive data, such as veterans' medical record, benefits determination, and educational records. Without proper safeguards, these systems are vulnerable to intrusion by groups seeking to obtain this sensitive information or disrupt VA operations. The FISMA audit can be considered a scorecard for evaluating the effectiveness of VA's IT security program. Our consistent approach to the audit allows us to track VA's progress when addressing previously communicated information security concerns. These concerns highlighted in our written statement are not new, as they have been subject to several OIG congressional testimonies 2019, 21, and 22. While VA has made progress in certain areas of their security program, these efforts can be characterized as incremental improvements. This is underscored by the fact that all 25 OIG recommendations from our most recent FISMA audit were repeat recommendations from prior reports. VA concurred with 15 of the recommendations and provided acceptable action plans for implementation. However, VA did not concur with the remaining 10 recommendations, despite having concurred with similar recommendations in prior year. For these non-concurrences, VA argued that their compliance percentages were adequate, often stating they achieved above 95%. Nonetheless, when we tested the same areas, the teams identified numerous examples of high-risk vulnerabilities, such as not applying critical system updates or not remediating unsecure system configurations. Accordingly, we stand by our findings and recommendation and encourage VA to implement corrective actions to address these security issues that we identified. In addition to our FSMA audit, we've been expanding our information security inspection program to review VA sites not typically evaluated under the annual audit. While our inspections focus on similar high-risk security controls as FSMA, these engagements evaluate controls at a facility level rather than an enterprise-level assessment performed under the agency-wide audit. Consequently, both engagements provide a consistent framework for identifying security issues and providing recommendations that can be applied by the CIO and local facility leadership. To date, we have published 18 inspection reports evaluating the compliance with federal security requirements at a variety of VA facilities. Some of these facilities include VA medical centers, Financial Service Center, the Health Eligibility Center, and outpatient clinics. On a positive note, VA has implemented successful action plans in response to these inspections, and we have closed 70% of the 131 recommendations. This shows that our facility inspections can identify issues that need remediation, and VA has the capability to act promptly to make necessary improvements. To enhance the effectiveness of VA's security program, all facility leaders should review our inspection reports and proactively address these security issues without waiting for an OIG inspection to occur. Doing so would position VA to make meaningful progress towards remediating the weaknesses that have adversely impacted the effectiveness of the IT security program. VA still has a long ways to go to appropriately secure sensitive veteran information and its mission-critical systems. Consequently, we believe that VA's successful implementation of the FSMA inspection recommendations will be vital for protecting the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of its critical system that hosts sensitive veteran information. Chairman Rosendale, this concludes my statement. I'd be happy to answer any questions you or other members of the subcommittee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Bowman. The written statement of Mr. Bowman will be entered into the hearing record. Mr. Powner, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to deliver your opening statement on behalf of MITRE.
Chairman Rosendale, Ranking Member Sherrill McCormick, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on MITRE's independent cybersecurity assessment that was directed by the Strengthening VA Cybersecurity Act of 2022. MITRE is a nonprofit, nonpartisan research institution that operates federally funded research and development centers. Cybersecurity is a core competency at MITRE, demonstrated by the decades of our contributions to the field. For example, we are the creator and maintainer of the attack framework, which is used by many to perform threat-informed testing on operational networks. We currently have over 1,500 cybersecurity professionals that provide cyber expertise to places like VA, DHS's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and U.S. Cyber Command. I was a member of an internal advisory committee that oversaw the planning, execution, and reporting of our independent assessment. We engaged early with your staff on our assessment to ensure that we were meeting the many requirements called for in the Act. As directed by the law, our assessment included a comprehensive review of the 5 high-impact systems and an overall evaluation of VA's information security program. I will briefly discuss our findings and recommendations. We found that VA implemented many standard measures and provided fundamental levels of security protection consistent with VA and NIST guidance. However, we identified findings with each systems that we categorized as high, moderate, and low risk. Thematic findings of these system assessments called for improvements in applying software patches, access controls, software development practices, logging events to detect ongoing attacks, and configuring operating systems, databases, and cloud services. We have performed hundreds of these systems assessments across various federal agencies over the years, and the total number of findings we found with these 5 systems was relatively consistent with systems of similar size. However, we did find that the high-risk findings was slightly lower than what we typically find. It's important to note that VA remediated almost 30% of our system findings and nearly 50% of the high-risk findings by the time we delivered our report, and it now reports that they've remediated 70% of those findings and 93% of the high-risk findings. We made 11 recommendations associated with the 5 systems assessed that included prioritizing the remediation of high and moderate risk findings. Other recommendations focused on applying patches, improving vulnerability scanning capabilities, and configuring systems and cloud offerings appropriately. Now, regarding the overall assessment of VA's cyber program, we found systemic and operational management issues that are consistent with past IG reports. These systemic findings called for improvements in cybersecurity risk management, continuous monitoring, medical device security, cloud security, reducing shadow IT, and improving detection and response and recovery activities. We made 35 recommendations to improve VA's overall cybersecurity program, and the priority recommendations included enhancement to VA's risk management framework, developing baseline configurations for cloud environments, reducing shadow IT to mitigate cybersecurity risk, configuring endpoint detection and response solutions to block malicious software, and creating alerts based on audit logs to improve visibility of high-impact events. In summary, Mr. Chairman, I would like to commend the committee for calling for such a comprehensive review and VA's management team's responsiveness and commitment to consistently improving its security posture. We believe the combination of our recommendations, VA's ongoing improvements, and your strong oversight will significantly enhance VA's cybersecurity effectiveness, thereby strengthening the department's ability to protect and serve America's veterans. This concludes my statement, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Powner. The written statement of Mr. Powner will be entered into the hearing record. We will now proceed to questioning, and I will recognize myself for 5 minutes. Excuse me. Mr. Bowman, I understand that all 25 of your recommendations in the fiscal year 2023 FSMA audit were repeat recommendations. How long has OIG been recommending that the VA fix these problems?
So I've been doing the FSMA audit since 2008, and for those 25 recommendations, most of them are over 10 years age. Now, we do modify some of those recommendations as we see security improvements, but the core recommendations are largely unchanged for more than 10 years.
10 years. Mr. Bowman, in your report, Mr. DelBene did not agree with 10 of your recommendations. Previous VA chief information officers had agreed with similar recommendations in your previous audits, as you stated in your testimony. Did the VA demonstrate that any of your findings or recommendations were incorrect?
So this year, we've taken a very proactive approach with OIT senior leadership, and we spent 2 weeks going over our findings and recommendations and trying to get management concurrences. I believe that effort, we're going to see a lot fewer non-concurrences this year in 2024 when compared to 2023 because of these communication efforts.
So again, did they demonstrate in these meetings that any of your recommendations were incorrect?
We modified some of the recommendations to be more accurate, but in general, they were accurate.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Bowman, you testified that the VA has, quote, many pervasive IT security weaknesses, resulting in unacceptable risk without violating any kind of security measures that we all know we have to deal with. Could you give us some examples?
A lot of our high-risk findings involve access control, configuration management, security management. So you may be having issues with password complexity, reviewing user accounts on financial management systems, unsecure configuration of web applications and databases. Those are the most salient ones that come to mind.
Thank you. Mr. Powner, to what extent did your findings and recommendations match OIG's FSMA audits?
Yeah, so I think if you look at their report and our report, there's a lot of consistency in their complementary reviews. I will say, we did a real deep dive on those 5 systems to start with. To Mr. Bowman's credit, I think there's some areas they look at in terms of like configuration management and contractor system oversight that was probably stronger than what MITRE did. But I would say that we MITRE, like looking at shadow IT, looking at detection capabilities, That's where we probably were a little bit more deeper and stronger on our side. So I think there was a lot of consistency. We had 11 findings, they had 8. They tracked pretty well, but it wasn't completely duplicative. And I think if you look at the combination of both of those reports, tackling those priority recommendations would definitely make VA cybersecurity a lot stronger.
Thank you. Mr. Powner, as to the 5 IT systems that you reviewed, how many findings did you make for each of them? Can we have a breakdown?
Yeah, so we had a total, there were 5 systems. There were 442 total findings when we did our review. The financial management system at 107, the loan guarantee at 63, the healthcare system at 107, My Healthy Vet had 56, and the enterprise mobile application platform also had 107 with a total of 442. And I think it's important to note, by the time we delivered our report in April, 30% of those 442 recommendations had been remediated. Not only remediated, but we went back and tested for those 2 and made sure they were fixed appropriately.
Okay, so that would still leave us 412 according to some quick math. 30
Well, no, 30%, sir.
30%.
30%, sir.
Okay.
30%, sir. So if you look at,
That's 120, 134 out of 442. So that still leaves us 300.
yeah, so they now report that they're at about overall, so we met with VA and they gave us an update on their remediation progress. They now report that they have about 70% of those 442 findings remediated, and all of the high-risk findings but 2. We had 29 high-risk findings, 27 of the 29 they report as being remediated.
Okay.
So I think they continue to make progress as they report back to us.
Okay. Mr. DelBene, I'm going to ask you about those, but I see I've reached my 5-minute limitation, and out of respect for the rest of these committee members, I will yield and bring in Ranking Member Sherrill McCormick for 5 minutes questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. DelBene, while I was glad to see the modest increase in VA's cybersecurity budget in this program, still represents less than 1% of VA's total discretionary budget. Yet, it is expected to manage the information security for the entire enterprise. Do you believe that $707 million budget is adequate to address the acute and unique cybersecurity challenges facing the Department of Veterans?
Well, thank you for the question. To answer it directly, I do not think that our budget is adequate to the task. I'll give you just an example. We have a role called Information Security Officer. For the entire VA, we have approximately 360 people who do this job. These are the people that evaluate all of the systems of the VA. There are over 1,000 of them. All of the locations of the VA, there were approximately 2,000 locations as well as 650,000 desktops. These are the people that are responsible for evaluating the security of those systems. The model for staffing there would have us have over 600 people in those roles, but we don't have the funding to do that. So what we have to do is take a risk-based approach of actually, on a technical basis, evaluating what our primary risks are in rank order from the top to the bottom, come up with remediation plans for precisely those problems, and go down the list religiously, month after month. But we need more staffing. We need so funding for staffing, funding for logging, which we are not able to do, which actually the Office of Management budget has specified the zero trust level of logging investment as an example that we need to do to catch all the events that occur, and we just do not have the funding. So we have to be super, super prioritized in terms of where we actually do spend our money.
Thank you, Mr. DelBene. Mr. Powner, in your testimony, you noted that the findings of your cybersecurity assessment on VA were relatively consistent with other similar-sized systems, and that the number of high-risk findings made was lower than what was typically seen. How does the VA cybersecurity budget stack up against these other systems, and does VA spend more or less than these entities?
Well, VA, when you look at the size of the organization, I don't know if I have all those details, but I will say, their IT, because of their the size of the organization and their IT budget and their cyber budget is higher than most, primarily because they're a larger organization. I mean, that's how a lot of this gets allocated from OMB. But I don't have details in terms of how that relates to the adequacy of some of those others.
So then my next question is for Mr. DelBene. In looking at the breakdown of the incidents by attack vector in the FY23 Annual Cybersecurity Performance Summary, it appears to me that attacks via email or the web have decreased drastically, while issues regarding loss of theft of equipment has risen. What can you attribute to these changes?
Well, first, to answer the question in terms of our spending level, as a percentage of discretionary spend, the IT budget for VA is amongst the lowest in the federal government, sitting at around, I think, 4%, but I can get you the specifics of that. So just to cap off on that one, we have been super religious about things. If I understand your question, it's around the attack vector of phishing. We have heightened our anti-phishing efforts in terms of campaigning to individuals in the organization. Here's how to recognize a phish. Here's what to do with it. We've implemented tools to actually say when a phish occurs, report it. But the additional things that you have to do is you have to actually close down the desktop to have fewer and fewer things that can actually be exploited when a phish is actually clicked on inadvertently. And then the final thing we've done is the best thing to do is to try to attack yourself as well. And so we've done a 4x increase in the amount of what we call red teaming, which is when you try to find a way in yourself using independent contractors, which is a best practice in the industry. We'd like to do even more than we do today, but that's a place where, again, getting back to this prioritization of the budget, we concluded that making sure that we were strong in anti-phishing was important, and that one of the ways to find those loopholes and those ways in was by attacking ourselves, so we found room for that funding.
Well, thank you for those efforts, but my other question is real quick, and it's about the rise in the theft of equipment. Is there any steps that you've been taking?
I'm sorry, on that one, I'm not sure. Let me pass that one over to Ms. Sherrill to see if things come to her mind on that one.
Yeah, I don't. Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. I do not have any specifics on that. We can certainly get back to you on the rise. I do know that we have protections in place around equipment theft, that we can wipe equipment if it does, as soon as it's reported stolen. Staff have a requirement and policy to report it within 24 hours, and they call the Enterprise Service Desk, and our service desk has the ability to remotely wipe any laptop, mobile phone, or any VA equipment at that point.
And I know we're in time, but super quickly, the other thing is that the data on those desktop or laptop machines is encrypted, so it would be difficult to actually access in the first place.
Thank you so much. I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Surface McCormick. I'm now going to recognize our first representative from Texas. You guys are well represented today. Mr. Self.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to get to the GAO report as well, because we have 3 reports about cybersecurity at VA. I want to start with 2 of the most significant attacks against VA have been partners, Microsoft and Change Healthcare. What are you doing to make sure that they also secure veterans' data? Because I take it that all of this discussion has been internal to VA. How about your 2 major partners? Mr. DelBene.
Okay. So in those 2 incidences, in terms of Change Healthcare, I think in terms of their connection to us, we had very good cybersecurity practices. The problem was with problems within Change Healthcare themselves. We put contractual requirements around things like security baselines that they have to follow. And so we enforce those baselines when we do our contractual arrangements. We meet with them to make sure that they've actually followed those contractual arrangements.
Did they get veterans' data?
They have not been able to confirm directly, but it is our presumption that they did, given the massiveness of that actual.
So what are you going to do to protect veterans' data in your partners' cybersecurity environment?
We have to push them to actually meet the requirements that we contractually place on them. HIPAA also places requirements on them directly to secure that information, and we need to enforce those requirements.
Okay, so I want to ask a question, Mr. DelBene. We've spent $10 billion on electronic health records so far. How much of this cybersecurity vulnerability do you think is tied to the fact that we don't have a seamless EHR system yet after $10 billion? The fact that we have Vista, which is the
system that we've had historically, plus we have Oracle, which we are moving to. The fact there are two systems obviously increases the surface area, if you will. We have to protect two systems. I feel good about the cyber protection of the Vista system. Things like the data all being encrypted at rest, the fact that we do audit of access controls on Vista, data in transmission being encrypted as well. I feel good, generally speaking, about where we are with Vista security. But there's no doubt that moving to a single system would decrease our surface area that we'd have to protect.
We spend a lot of time on technology here, and I submit to you that the more complex the technology that you're using or fragmented, I won't say complex, I'll say fragmented, I think probably opens you up to vulnerabilities.
I generally would agree with that.
Now, we've increased your budget 40% over the last 2 years, right? And in your private sector work, did you budget like the federal government that's always baseline budgeting last year plus? Did you ever use zero-based budgeting in your private sector work? And would you consider that here?
The proposal that
Because it moves so fast. I would think that zero-based budgeting would be great in the cybersecurity realm, and my Texas colleague here might disagree, but it moves so fast. I think that zero-based budgeting would go back to what you need this year as opposed to last year.
we have spent a ton of time breaking down the cybersecurity budget into its components that members could understand and actually, describe for you, here are the different things that we're paying for. And I think that's the equivalent of what you're getting at, and I agree with the principle. You can't just say the top line number looks like this and we'd like another 5%. We need to be able to come to you and say that we're spending on these purposes and here are the places that we have the gaps. So I think that's the essence of what you're asking.
Okay, so I have less than a minute. The PBR and the OIT requests were different. So just so our audience, where did you come up with the increase in the OIT budget and where is that coming from? Internal to VA, just so we understand your request and where it's going to come from.
I'm not sure I completely, can you
The
rephrase?
presidential budget request is different than the OIT. The OIT was
It is.
larger. So where
was.
is that difference coming from, just so we understand federal budgeting?
A large part of it is that with the OMB mandate, which we actually agree with, to move to zero trust, there's a big investment that's required to do that.
Now, where will those funds come from the PBR? Is Congress responsible for giving you that extra money? That's what I'm asking. Or is it coming out of internal VA budget?
I'm not sure I quite understand. Maybe that's in your bailiwick rather than mine to determine. We present a budget request to you, and then
Then I'll ask a different committee.
I'm sorry that I'm not quite connected with the question.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. I will now recognize Mr. Kennedy. Good to have you join us today.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thank you all for being here today and for your testimony and certainly for your service to our country. The VA's cybersecurity budget is grossly underfunded, as you've already recognized, Assistant Secretary DelBene, and it's been noted it's less than 1%, much less than 1% of the overall VA budget. In my district, in Buffalo, the Buffalo VA Medical Center and the Regional Veterans Benefits Administration has been breached 4 times altogether, and that was just from July 1st to September 30th, just in 1 quarter. So clearly that's unacceptable, not just to me, but to our veterans and for our veterans. And the last thing our veterans need to be worried about is whether or not their private medical and personal data will be leaked when they're dealing with a wide variety of health issues. It's clear that changes need to be made. And I'm curious, from the line of questioning and your answers that you've given thus far, how much this is costing taxpayers, how much this is costing our federal government, how much each cyber attack costs each hospital or benefits administration.
Thank you for the question. I'm not sure I know per se. The one thing I would say is that the cost outweighs the cost of actually, in most cases, of securing the information in the first place. And so some of the things that lead to the cyber attacks that you've seen are preventable with common hygiene practices. For instance, you can't exfiltrate data when it's encrypted at rest unless somehow you've gotten a hold of the keys which weren't secured adequately. But generally speaking, in most cases, when you see that data exfiltrated, it's because they haven't implemented things like encryption at rest and encryption in transit that they should be doing. So I think the other thing that's very difficult to measure is what is the impact to a patient's life if their diagnosis, which might be sensitive, actually gets exposed. And so it's very difficult to calculate, but very extreme once the data has actually been exfiltrated.
Do you have a number on how much this costs the VA across the board? According to the FBI, there's $12.5 billion to the federal government on these cyber attack breaches. Do you know how much it costs the VA specifically?
I do not have that number. We could try to get an estimate of that number in terms of the activities that we have to engage in when these breaches occur. I will say, but we've been fortunate that we, within our internal systems, have not had substantial breaches as the reports to Congress kind of confirm. They've been more in particular systems over a very long period of time. So so far, I don't take any solace to that, but we are fortunate in that regard so far.
Right. I was looking at your report earlier. There's nearly 1,000 breaches across the country at VA sites. There's got to be a number associated with that. How much that costs the American people. That number I'd like to get. I think it's important, especially when we're talking about investing more money. And I believe you're underselling yourself on how much is actually needed. When we're talking about, you mentioned about 300 or so employees that are focused on cybersecurity, and we're only looking at a budget of potentially a little over $700 million on a $350+ billion overall VA budget. That's so minuscule. I'd like to see a number that is appropriate for the amount of people we need to hire to secure the sensitive medical information of our veterans and prevent these cyber attacks. To your point, Assistant Secretary, the cost of underselling ourselves and not securing our cyberspace is a hell of a lot more than it would be to secure it.
Well, we'd be happy to come back to you with that information. I do want to clarify, though, there have not been thousands of breaches in VA locations, and so I'd love to actually come back to you and get a little bit more specificity there, too. We're in this dilemma of I actually feel very good about the efforts that we are taking, and that's a matter of, as I said before, prioritizing every dollar spent on the highest priority use case for that. But to your point, and I very much agree, as I've said before, the total amount is inadequate.
I have a 13-page report here from July 1st to September 30th, 2024, that has 1,040 notification letters that went out regarding breaches. Now, these weren't 1,000 different locations, but there were 1,000 different breaches at various sites across the country. Are those numbers accurate?
I think you may be referring to privacy issues as opposed to cyber breaches. But we're happy to get, so for instance, a list of veterans might go to the wrong person in mail, for instance. And so that would be different from a cyber breach. But we're happy to circle back with you and get clarity on that.
Yes, we can provide some clarity
Yield back, yep.
for the representative. Thank you so much. I will now recognize the representative from Texas, Mr. Luttrell. Again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Sir, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. DelBene, how long have you been serving in this role?
Just a little bit under 3 years now.
Under 3 years. Now, the budget request is upwards of $700 million for cybersecurity, threat risk, and prevention in the VA. And the nefarious actors abroad that are wanting to do us harm are spending hundreds of billions of dollars. I'm a big advocate for cybersecurity, cyber risk, cyber threats, so I'm paying close attention to what you're asking for. Now, my issue that I have, since you've been in this role for 3 years, is that that means that the IG, how many IG reports do you think you received that's had the same amount of information repeatedly over the past 3 years? I mean, Mr. Bowman, how many IG reports do you present to the VA a year? 2, 3?
We present the annual FSMA report annually, but we also have notices of findings and recommendations based on our site visits. So what is eventually rolled up in the FSMA report, OINT is seen numerous times throughout the year.
Okay. And from what I understand from 2019, but actually upwards of kind of a decade plus, the IG reports repeating the same information over and over again. I get it. I understand the challenges of staying in front of the technological advances and protecting ourselves in the cyberspace. I got it. But it seems like the VA is not running in parallel. It seems you're reactive more than proactive. And I would argue the fact that you're comfortable with where you are and how VA is taking the proper steps to protect our veterans, but we should be running scared every single day because the data that the veterans provide and that aggregated beautiful data set is the most cherished asset we have in the country. Now, with the report that Mr. Powner provided with the IG reports, I would think that we're behind the curve. And you said that the budget and manning and equipping and staffing the VA will solve this problem. So can I ask you, if we provide the budget request that you're asking for and we have the ability to man, train, and equip the VA, will our cyber issues go away?
Thanks for the question. It's a great question. So let me unpack a few things there. We have not seen the same recommendations in their detail from OIT.
Well, I know Mr. Bowman said that they've altered or changed, but if they have the same underpinning, if you're peeling the onion back to the core of it and it's saying the same thing.
Yeah, let me just take a brief aside in terms of their methodology. The problem is, and we've had discussions with the OIG for my entire tenure on this, at the heart, they are not practitioners in cybersecurity. They're auditing us based on our particular set of policies we have. And what
I would assume that would be by, with, and through subject matter experts in the cyberspace. They're not just throwing mud at the wall and throwing it at you.
Well, they are taking cyber auditors, not practitioners, and they are doing things like finding places where scans reveal a vulnerability, which we then go back to them and say, well, the way you scanned isn't quite correct. The net of it is they are not actually, and I've asked for this repeatedly from them, give me a risk-based analysis of what you're finding.
Is that what not Mr. Powner?
No, both of them have a very similar methodology. The thing I actually find in the MITRE report most helpful is the analysis of the 5 systems. Super helpful to us. They do depend upon the OIG reports and the findings there and build on top of it with a bunch of interviews of people at OIT, for instance, and OIS. And so they're building upon the OIG's reports. But at the heart, this is an audit exercise. This is not a cyber assessment exercise. And we've had this debate back and forth my entire 3-year tenure.
Sounds like a pretty silly debate to be having considering the problem set that we're issuing. And I'll piggyback off of what Mr. Kennedy said, 1,000 breaches nonetheless, breaches are happening.
And we have focused our efforts in a very risk-based analysis of where do we think the greatest risk is to the VA, and we have attacked that mercilessly and relentlessly for the past 3 years.
So will the individuals that you're going to add to the VA system zero out the threat risk assessments for VA?
There is no way, and getting to your first point, I am anything but lackadaisical about cyber. And my team knows it is the thing I stay up at night about. It is the biggest worry that I have in this job. And I think that if you add resources, it will help us tremendously, but it will not zero out the cyber risk that the VA faces. It is
We're in a position to not have you sit in front of us and say, hey, look, we got hit, and you missed it because you missed something that's coming to your left from your left shoulder. And we have, so with the EHR, I'm gonna get close on this one, I'm gonna try, okay? With the EHRs, we have 6 facilities that are functional currently, but we're in a purposeful pause. We have 172 that need to go active over a period of time. From my understanding, that's not even gonna be initiated until 2026. But if we're going from Vista to Cerna, right? Oracle, that's a lot of bandwidth. Are you working in parallel, I'm sure with Mr. Spaeth here, to make sure that every single one, I'm just throwing you under the bus right there. Are we working in parallel, making sure that our systems are capable and have the effective and efficient defense posturing to make sure that these facilities are protected? I ran out of time, sir. Just get back to me on that question, okay, please?
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much. We were going to have several rounds of questioning, so you're going to have ample time to go back in again. So thank you very much. I think that my two colleagues from Texas, one of the things that they're focused on is the sophistication of the criminals is changing daily, and we do recognize that. And the VA must address tomorrow's risk today. You have to identify what is tomorrow's risk and attack that today, not yesterday's risk, tomorrow. And while it is a difficult task, and I hear you talking about budget, Mr. DelBene, it's not 40%, Mr. Self. It is a 62% increase in spending since 2023. We went from $436 million in 2023 to $707 million in 2025. Now, in everybody else's world, outside of Washington, D.C., that is a crap load of money. A 62% increase. And you have been fully funded in every request. So this body hasn't come in and said, reduce it. So when I hear you talking about budget and you just need more, the people in this city are tired of hearing, just throw more money at it. And the people in this country are tired of hearing, just throw more money at it. That is a lot of money. Mr. Powner, if I understood correctly, Mr. DelBene was just basically saying that you guys are really nice, you know, pushing your pencils around, but all you do is look at a bunch of paperwork and you don't understand technology. You're just processing paperwork, and you don't understand really the nuts and bolts of these operations that you are auditing. You're just a plain old auditor. How many of your findings related to these system vulnerabilities was the VA already aware of, and how many did MITRE uncover?
Well, I'll answer that, but I just want to clarify that we're not auditors. We did an independent assessment, not an audit. I spent a career at GAO doing these audits. I know what an audit is, and what we did at MITRE was not an audit. We did a deep independent assessment. The 442 findings that we had, I would say most of those findings, they may not have been surprised by many of them, but they didn't know about them. And I'll tell you why. We looked at program documentation before we did our deep system tests. There's something called a Plan of Action and Milestone, a POAM that many of you know, and I know the IG looks at these all the time. Those 442 findings, of those findings, there were 26 findings that had an associated POAM, which meant they knew about it. So I would say 26 of the 442, they knew about it. And I think what we did is we did deep testing using automated tools, but we also have experts that we did hands-on testing too without automated tools. And I think Mr. DelBene agrees. I mean, that added a lot of value when you look at the vulnerabilities that we found to better secure these systems. And again, they've remediated 70% of the 442 and 93% of the high-risk ones. So I think we agree that these are serious things that need to be remediated.
Thank you very much, Mr. Powner. Mr. DelBene, you testified in May that you have a risk-based cybersecurity strategy. You disagree with some of Mr. Bowman and Mr. Powner's findings because you believe they failed to take risk into account. How do you evaluate and prioritize cybersecurity risk differently than their offices do?
We start with theories on how cyber threat actors will get into the VA by looking at the actual topology that we have of the organization and the weaknesses that we have. We then look at our programs in each particular point of vulnerability to decide, is it adequate or is it inadequate? We then figure out what the technologies that's available to us or the efforts that we can do to actually shut down the issues that we have. We then look at organizationally, what linchpins do we have in the organization to actually enforce compliance. So for instance, we've looked at the ATO, the authority to operate. We've looked at FISMA, a place where I have to approve funding. And we've said, what is the data that we want to bring to those forums? And what do we want to hold the teams accountable for? The other thing we've done is we've actually taken steps to increase our monitoring of actual threats in real time that attack the organization, make sure that we have the right logging in place. We've dramatically increased the amount of logging and the assessment that goes on top of that. All of those start with a sense of where do we think the threat vector is and how good are our defenses in those particular areas.
Okay, Mr. Bowman, do you agree or disagree with this standard and this process?
Federal security requirements allow management to make risk-based decisions when mitigating cybersecurity threats. We look at the most critical areas being access control and configuration management. We are aware that VA has made improvement on being aware of the vulnerabilities that we identify. We also use very technical tools. We use Nessus and Nmap, which are well-recognized and credible tools. And we will find vulnerabilities that VA is not aware of, although in 2020.
So do you think his process, though, not to cut you off, but I'm already over my time, do you think that the process that Mr. DelBene has just laid out is effective way to assess their risk?
OINT's risk-based approach is appropriate.
Okay. I'm now over my time. Ranking Member Sherrill McCormick, recognize you for your question.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. DelBene, going back to the Change Healthcare for a moment, I was under the understanding that while veterans' data was potentially impacted in the breach, this data was lost through community care or other healthcare services, not VA. Is that correct?
If I understand your question correctly, the pathway that involves Change Healthcare or the process is the community care process for billing. Actually, I think it includes both processes. It's also for internal. Any place we have to do billing that's outside of the VA, that would be impacted by Change Healthcare because they're the clearinghouse.
Okay, and despite the fact that VA was not attributed in this breach, how is the VA supporting veterans who have had their PII and PHI potentially impacted?
In this particular case, the primary respondent is Optum or Change Healthcare as stipulated by the HIPAA agreement. They're the primary responder, and so they've had the interaction with customers who may come in and say, can you confirm whether I've been breached or not? They actually are not looking, Optum is not looking for us to take that responsibility, and that's kind of the order that it would be done in.
And has Optum been reporting their results and their finding as they're going forward?
I am unclear on that one. We could get back to you on what response back we've gotten.
Okay.
So one thing, just to be super clear, is once it got out of the responsibility office on the cyber incident, it would be handled by VHA in terms of them, processing responses to veterans, et cetera.
Thank you. Mr. Bowman, despite these differences, VA appears to continue to struggle to implement additional oversight measures necessary for contractors. This has been a reoccurring recommendation for at least 5 years. Has VA made any progress in implementing improved security procedures for contractors?
So our FSMA audit evaluates VA employees and contractor employees. When we look at the cloud-based environment, we see similar vulnerabilities as that you would find on the VA network. Where the cloud environment is different is that VA may have a difficult time implementing their baseline security controls because they don't have visibility of those systems hosted in the cloud. And so they're comparable in their security posture, but the cloud environment definitely has some unique challenges that VA wouldn't face internally.
Now, also, Mr. Bowman, essentially all the recommendations made in FY23 FSMA audit were repeat recommendation from the previous year. Why do these issues continue to plague the department?
So VA is a very large and decentralized organization. You've got 300,000 employees, 100,000 contractor, millions of endpoints. It's scattered all across the globe. It's very difficult to implement consistent controls across the enterprise just because it's so large and diverse. Securing that large of a enterprise is a huge undertaking. And so because of that, we have a lot of long-standing findings and recommendations.
Now, along with these recommendations, we did see some incremental improvements. Could you provide some examples of areas where VA has made progress?
So when we want to talk about vulnerability testing, in 2023, we were seeing vulnerabilities on the network that were over 5 years aged. In 2024, when we conducted those same tests, we're more seeing vulnerabilities that are aged 1 and 2 years. So that to me is a significant improvement. Although it doesn't make the finding go away, it shows that VA has dedicated resource to to attack some of those legacy vulnerabilities?
Thank you. Mr. DelBene, MITRE's report found that increased audit frequency adds time-consuming responsibilities to already stretched workloads. For example, the Loan Guarantee Program underwent 9 technical audits in less than a year span, while IFAMs will support 8 technical audits and other financial audits in about a year. How can the VA streamline the audits necessary to support cybersecurity operations without overloading an already lean staff?
It's a good question. I think generally speaking, we can automate a certain amount of the audits that occur, but there's no substitute for somebody who has cybersecurity professional capabilities going in and evaluating the systems per se. So the other thing we've been pushing for, though, is when there are systems that are, we call them business-led IT, shadow IT is the same question, same thing. We're pushing a higher responsibility on the owners of those systems to show that they actually have good cybersecurity practices. And that's something that hasn't been done before. We've worked with OGC to establish that they actually do have a responsibility and can spend their own money to make sure for cybersecurity practices. And we need to push a bunch of that responsibility to them while we track it as well to make sure that it's adequate.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I recognize Representative Self.
Mr. Powner, you're not auditors. The people who do your work, are they academics or are they previous practitioners?
They're primarily previous practitioners. So when we assemble a team to go in and look at a system, we have folks that have deep expertise on cloud security, whatever system we're looking at it, whether it's Linux, whatever the operating system is, and that's how we went about this evaluation. So for the 5 systems, they were different individuals because they had unique expertise on each system.
And I think you gave us a number earlier. How many do you have? 1,100?
We have about 1,500 cyber professionals across MITRE, and we do significant work like at DHS, CISA, out at NIST. We have a presence out there at NIST and everything, and DOD in particular.
So you're not academics?
No, we're not. I mean, we do research, but we're not all academics, no.
Right. So the GAO report that I mentioned, the 23 agencies that fall under the CFO Act of 1990 required to meet, and the actual description here is taking steps to standardize their incident response plans and demonstrating improvement in their capabilities for incident detection, analysis, and handling. 20 out of the 23 agencies that GAO looked at, 20 did not meet the requirement by August of 2023. The VA was one of those. There are 10 findings in the cybersecurity area under this study. 2 of them have been closed, and I will admit they've been closed. One of them was the only priority flag, but that leaves 8 that are still open. And I always go back to the GAO because the GAO recommendations often in this organization and others are simply ignored, as far as I can tell. Concerning to me is we've got Mr. Bowman testified to some vulnerabilities that are 10 years old, findings, vulnerabilities. You've been on the job for 3 years. The GAO has 8 out of 10 that have not, they're still open and not addressed. And lastly, I want to go back to this $110 million increase that you've asked for FY25. And I'll just give you a hint. We're not going to pass the appropriations bills for FY 2025. We're what, a couple of months into FY 2025 already. So we're looking at simply giving VA writ large some bucket of money. So I think you're going to have to fight internally for your $110 million because I don't think that's going to be designated when we finally see how we go about funding the rest of 2025. Frankly, I think it'll be at least 2 bites at the apple. I think there will be a short term and then a longer term, but I think you're going to have to fight internally, in my opinion, for your $110 million. I don't think that's going to be a congressional detail in the funding lines. Mr. DelBene, so let's move past 2025 to FY 2026. You certainly are working on your FY 2026 budget already. Can you give this committee an idea of the increase you're going to ask for in FY 2026, which will come out from the PBR, the President Budget Request early next year?
Respectfully, accepting the question, I think that's considered an internal working material with the administration right now.
Okay. With that, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Self. I now recognize Representative Kennedy.
Thank you, Chairman. Assistant Secretary, again, I want to go back to the breaches. Obviously, there are more attempts than actual breaches. Can you give us a number on how many breaches there actually were?
I will have to get back to you. It is a very small number, but let me get back to you on the specific. If you're talking about attempts, there are lots of attempts on the infrastructure of the VA. So that, if that's the number that you were quoting, I wouldn't even challenge that number.
Data breaches, look, I had 4 in my region alone in Western New York in the last quarter. So
But
you're
those are
telling me-
data breaches,
Correct.
not cyber data breaches.
Okay, explain the difference.
There are many places where PII, personal identifiable information, could be leaked from the VA, for instance, in paper form, or it would be a breach, for instance, if a memo for a particular veteran went to the wrong veteran. Those would all be considered breaches.
But not cyber attacks.
Correct.
So these cyber attacks are very limited in scope, but when they happen, they shut down entire data systems, correct?
We proactively shut down those data
Correct.
systems to do the forensic stuff.
And then oftentimes, the hospital or medical center is held accountable, and really, these criminals are stealing millions of dollars at a time.
The most common attack, which I agree with you generally, what they'll do is they'll ransom, they'll lock the system, they'll exfiltrate the data, and then they'll extract a ransom to get back essentially the keys.
Right. And this is an unfortunate, common cyber attack in our healthcare systems across America.
It is.
So the VA system is just another healthcare system that is vulnerable to these attacks. I think what we're trying to get to here with your leadership is how we can mitigate these, especially for our veterans. Our veterans expect when they go to these medical centers, whether it's a hospital or an outpatient site, that their data is protected, and they deserve to have that data protected. How do we protect that data to ensure that these cyber criminals are not hacking our VA systems? And look, if it's $110 million you need in order to hire more people to do the work, to protect our centers from potentially being held at ransom from these cyber criminals, then so be it. Explain exactly how that will prevent it. I think what we're looking for is the number. How much will that be mitigated? Obviously, to get to a number of 0, it would be best case scenario. That is the goal. But the bottom line is we want to ensure that we can protect our data as much as possible. $110 million, again, in a $350+ billion budget. Now, albeit, it's a lot of money. It's on top of $500, almost $600 million already. But it's a massive system. And and I'd like to see the number where I started. I'd like to see the number that we've paid out, how much it's cost the American people, how much it's cost the veterans, and how much it will cost to prevent that money from being out. I think this is just a simple data number that we can be provided.
So let me, if I may, take that away to give you some estimate. I will say, and I can't overstress this, there is no number where I can say the data is protected. Representative Rosendale, in fact, mentioned this in his opening comment. It's impossible to actually say I am protected. But we can get you a number and a kind of a breakdown of where we see the needed extra investments, if that would be helpful.
Well, I think it'll be, Chairman? I think it will be helpful to you making your case for more money to protect our veterans and the data that.
I will say it's beyond the 110 that actually is.
That's the number we need. The number we need, if it's beyond 110, that's the number we need. We need to know at least what the goal is here that we're shooting for. So we can all work together to try to get as close to that as possible.
Thank you. Let us take that away. The other thing I would stress is that the investment has to be made over multiple years. I don't think it's actually responsible to throw a ton of money at this problem all at once. I think it has to be a sustained year-over-year increase in investment.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative. Mr. Powner, your report says that the VA lacks a cybersecurity risk strategy that establishes their risk tolerance. If there's no written cybersecurity risk strategy, what is the VA's basis for making these risk management decisions?
Well, first of all, I think it would be great to get that answered from VA, but let me just say this. They do have tools and processes to assess risk, okay? So that's not like they're not using things. They have tools and processes. Our point on having a comprehensive risk management strategy is this. You want to assess risk consistently across the organization. VA is a siloed organization. So if you have a strategy that allows for more consistent assessment with the assessors, they're going to assess the risk likelihood and impact more consistently. That's our point. I think Mr. DelBene mentioned about the business procuring systems and software. Okay, so if they're then are we using something consistent when systems are authorized and that? So we look at risk more consistently across the enterprise. That's our point. I mean, they do their best to assess risk, but we think something that will allow for that consistent risk approach would be beneficial to VA.
Thank you. Mr. DelBene, you set your own risk benchmarks in response to some of the audit findings. For instance, 95% compliance rates, whereas the auditors insisted on 100% compliance rates. How did you come up with this, and how can you be confident that the other 5% poses a minimal risk?
Well, for one thing, that 95% exceeds where the industry is generally, so we feel pretty good about it from that perspective. But the only thing you can do is actually look for the things that you have not remediated and get a sense of what you think the risk of those particular issues are. Everything is a balancing of how much will it take to actually remediate that risk versus what do we think the increase is. But let me pass this one to our CISO for any other thoughts she may have.
Ms. Sherrill.
Yes,
Please.
thank you. Mr. DelBene is right. We really look at every risk we have identified our most critical and our most bedrock systems in a list, and those are our systems with veteran data. Those make the critical list. Those are systems that keep services running, like our Active Directory system that authenticates all 640,000 users in the VA. Those systems are critical to providing services and also systems that have data. So we focus our resources in these areas where there is rich data for a hacker to want to go after.
Target-rich areas.
Exactly, thank you. Target-rich areas. We really focus those resources in that area. And we do have to take that risk-based approach. One of the key areas, as you guys are well familiar with, is around medical devices. Medical devices provide an incredible service to our veterans, but they are also some of the most vulnerable assets we have. And what we do, we have over the years built a very secure perimeter that allows us to stop a lot of attacks at the perimeter. And then we continue to build layers throughout the infrastructure down to those medical devices.
So Ms. Sherrill,
Yep.
all that being considered, it sounds to me like possibly you then are the one that should be developing this cybersecurity risk strategy. So why is it that you haven't developed this strategy that then Mr. Powner and MITRE could review and actually make a determination if it was dedicating resources in the proper areas?
We are absolutely focused on dedicating resources, and we do have risk strategies that we put into play, and we are continuing to mature those strategies over time. Over this last year, we have aligned our budget to the NIST cybersecurity framework, and we are also bringing our risk into governance so that there is leadership visibility into every risk accepted across the
But
entire.
apparently, we don't have a complete coordinated strategy. Mr. DelBene, if you're the one establishing the list or the criteria of what's compliant, doesn't that, by its very nature, make full compliance almost guaranteed if you're the one establishing the list?
The challenge is it's a very large organization, and so one of the things we have you've heard this discussion of POAMs, and there are literally thousands of POAMs, which either will describe why a risk is acceptable or why this configuration is acceptable or a timeline for when that risk will be remediated. Everything gets documented in that sense, but it's a large, expansive organization, and we've actually spent a ton of time managing our POAM list to make sure that those things that should have been remediated by a certain period of time are in fact remediated by that time. But essentially, one person cannot look at that entire list. We depend upon the entire team to be constantly poring over that list and saying, do I feel good about this still lingering out there or not? And so that's the culture change that needs to happen, where everybody is as paranoid as I am about the fact that we're just this far away from a breach. And that's what we've been trying to drive in the organization this past 3 years.
I yield my time, and I recognize Ranking Member Sherrill McCormick.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. DelBene, MITRE's report provided an important in-depth review of 5 high-impact systems. Obviously, there are many systems that were not selected, like the EHR and the VBMs. Are there any plans to conduct additional reviews of systems like these?
Thanks. That's a great question. We actually have had discussions around. We do see the value in what MITRE has done here. One of the things we are doing is when we're looking at when we have an ATO review going on those critical and bedrock systems, doing some independent assessment of the status of them before we approve that ATO. That is a work in progress. The MITRE report was very expensive, and we've got to figure out how we can liberate the dollars to do that. Obviously, we would only do that on the systems that we think would benefit and are risk-based by that kind of analysis. But we would love to do more of those kinds of analysis. We think it's something MITRE did very well.
Thank you. My next question is for Mr. Bowman. As we've heard today, VA has a variety of assessment at its disposal to assist in improving the cybersecurity program. While OIG is responsible for administration of the FISMA audit, it also conducts facility and specific information security reports. What is the role of this program, and what is the value add on top of the audits like those provided by FISMA and the SVAC Act?
So the FISMA audit is a statutory required audit that we have to do every year. The information or security inspections was our way of trying to communicate our findings from the facility level and let them boil up to the enterprise level. And we felt that if we could actually focus on just facility controls and we could communicate some of the findings from the FISMA, you're getting a ground-up approach to achieving better cybersecurity. So the main difference between FISMA, it's an enterprise-wide audit. The inspections is more of a facility audit.
Thank you. I want to go back to Mr. DelBene. The OIG noted that they have made 131 recommendations related to the site-specific inspections and are often finding similar issues from facility to facility. Outside of sharing these reports, what can VA do to proactively encourage and push facilities to do their own internal reviews and correct similar issues without waiting for IG to show up?
It's a very good question, one that I ask myself every time we receive one of the reports from the OIG, because you look at it and you say some of these issues we should have been able to find proactively. I do here go back to the fact that we've got 360 information security officers across all the more than 1,500 locations that we operate in and the 10,000 systems that we have. I think there are 2 things we specifically need to do. It needs to be a manageable number of facilities that particular ISSO is responsible for, so that he or she can think, like, oh, I remember like last week in this particular facility, they had this information security system or this camera security system that had this issue. I'm going to follow up with that person to make sure that got solved. That's piece one. Piece two is we need to actually make it clear what the responsibilities are for those ISSOs are, and we have done playbooks to actually describe in detail what that responsibility looks like. Mr. Spaeth actually is the person who has the ISSOs under his purview, and I don't know whether you have some comments you'd like to make in that area as well.
Thank you. So we have made great strides this year. We've, like Mr. DelBene said, we have implemented playbooks. We are doing an analysis against the number of facilities and systems for the ISSO's capabilities. We've actually taken a very proactive approach on training the ISSOs in various different control measures and methodologies, as well as aligned role-based training within our talent management system, and providing and bringing in some additional external training to give them real-world scenarios that they can use to address items that they might be finding, as well as integrating them as part of our cybersecurity operations, incident management, and response for individuals on the ground at those facilities.
Thank you, Mr. DelBene. During the September hearing on the program integrity tool, we heard of potential partnerships between VA and other entities in sharing information regarding fraud, waste, and abuse in the healthcare system, healthcare payments. Your testimony mentioned that partnerships with ISA, HHS, DHS, and OMB to assist with threat assessments and best practices. Can you speak more to these partnerships? And how does it, I might go ahead, speak to that, and then if anything, the next round.
Sure. The main thing that we do is we share threat intelligence. And so, for instance, the CISA will give us alerts on a frequent basis of either they see from scanning our infrastructure, they see something, and they ask us to track down, hey, is this a real vulnerability or not? Or there's a threat actor at large that's attacking healthcare systems, for instance. Here are what are called TTPs, or the indicators of compromise, IOCs rather. They'll say, you should scan your infrastructure for that. Similar things with HHS, where they see patterns that are happening, particularly in the healthcare industry as well. Now, we have a responsibility back to them as well, that we have to report any incidents we have within 24 hours back to them, so they can feel good about it from an overall perspective in the federal government, but also see if there's something that ought to be shared with other parts of the federal government as well.
Thank you. I yield back.
Representative Self.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bowman, you've been at this a long time. As pointed out by one of my colleagues, the cybersecurity budget is a minuscule part of the overall VA budget. And yet, it's gone up by 53%, at least by some calculations, over the last 2 years. And yet your office describes their progress towards solving cybersecurity issues as incremental and limited. So why is that? And the next question is that going to keep up with these ever-changing threats that we see in the cybersecurity environment?
Yeah, VA is a very large and decentralized organization. Hundreds of thousands of people log into the network every day. It's spread across the globe, the VA facilities. It's very difficult to make meaningful change across the enterprise. Yeah, that's the point. And to improve a security posture, it has to be done over time. And we are seeing some improvements. We're seeing some improvements in 2024 that we didn't see in 2023. Unfortunately, it's not significant enough for us to change some of our opinions, but we are noticing movement towards improvement. As far as the budget aspect goes, it's very difficult to put a dollar amount on what's going to resolve the security issues. Our FISMA focuses on the preventative controls, and the budget aspect of it is out of the scope of our audit. So I'd have to defer that question over to Mr. DelBene to give you a better answer.
Well, again, I want to ask you and Mr. Powner as well, is the progress that you see going to keep up with the future threats that we see? I mean, this is one of the fastest moving areas of security, is cybersecurity. Are we going to keep up? Mr. Bowman. Mr. Bowman.
So, yeah, cybersecurity, I'm sorry, I got my name confused with gentleman next to me. Cybersecurity, as you said, is ever-changing. And to attack the emerging threats and vulnerabilities, it has to rely on a continuous monitoring program. So you have to evaluate your security posture every day. There may be certain points in time where your security is very effective, and then new emerging issues come out and your security posture drops significantly.
But some of the vulnerabilities in your testimony are 10 years old. Mr. Powner, same question.
Yeah, I think if you look at what we need to do, and to credit to VA, I think there's a number of things that they have in the works. If you look at their remediation plan associated with our report, they focus on continuous monitoring. We need to get out of the game of writing long, lengthy poems that sit on shelves for a long period of time, and we need to respond to patches, configurations, real time. So like on our review, when we found significant findings, we sat down with the VA team and we fixed it that week. That's what we need to do. So you need continuous monitoring. We spend too long on authorizing these systems. The use of automation, we need to do that to quicken the pace there. I know VA also has an initiative looking at medical device vulnerabilities, trying to quicken the pace at which they identify those things. That's the things we need to do to stay ahead of these threat actors. And then again, I also will point out, it was a big part of our testimony and our review, but endpoint detection and response. What does that do? That's detection capabilities that blocks malicious actors. We need to do that. It's proactive, not just having processes when it already occurs and we're recovering. It's all that proactive stuff we need to quicken the pace. And I will say this too, FISMA. It's 2014, it's 10 years old. We need to look at FISMA as a Congress, not just this committee, but the entire Congress, and streamline FISMA and what we do. I think there's a lot of good work that Mr. Bowman does, but we do too many reports that sit on shelves that cost a lot of money that does not result in better security. So let's change FISMA, and we could all collectively do this, VA and the rest of the federal government.
Thank you for that testimony. I think we just heard an excellent testimony for the future of the federal government. Thank you very much for that. And I want to, and you've led me to, in visiting SpaceX, you know what one of their sayings is, I'm not sure it's their motto, is to fail fast. What does that mean? They want to iteratively learn by failing fast. I think we've got to institute that in the federal government in many ways. So thank you for that, Mr. Powner. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. You mean instead of failing often? Exactly. Mr. DelBene, the FISMA audit we were just discussing highlighted a lot of basic reoccurring problems like weak passwords, unpatched systems, and excessive access permissions. Why are basic cybersecurity measures still not implemented consistently across the VA?
They are. The problem is, again, they find OIG finds the places amongst thousands, for instance, of passwords, or tens or hundreds of thousands that might not meet the password complexity requirements. That is not to say that the vast majority of our passwords do not meet the password complexity requirements.
I understand the vast majority of them may, but if we have 1% or 2% of these end users not, then that's a vulnerability. Why is that most basic task, okay, taking years to get straightened out?
I agree with your point there. So let me add a little color to it. When you're talking about access control, we've actually enforced audits. The audits have to be done by the people who run the system or operate the system, not by actually us. So for instance, Vista needs to be done by the people who operate the Vista system in delivery of healthcare. So what we've done is we've created a system where we make sure that they do those audits, but when you have thousands of systems, we miss some. And I actually don't like that, and that's the thing we need to enforce more deeply. There are also things like passwords where we need to get the human out of the loop. And there are systems, for instance, where in theory, the ideal is you grant rights to a system for a short period of time, and then you revoke those rights via workflow. We need to invest in systems like that and the processes that come with them so we get out of this password business altogether. Now, one of the things we've done with multi-factor authentication is required a second factor whenever it's a person logging in. So a single password won't do it for them.
Right.
But there are system-to-system passwords that are still the bane of the existence of everybody in the industry's existence, and we need to fix that.
Okay, Mr. DelBene, OIG's report says they identified numerous critical and high-risk security vulnerabilities, and I quote, previously identified vulnerabilities persist on the networks. I believe you disagreed. Can you explain why?
I just disagree on two fronts. The first thing is the thing that they have talked about as recurring is the thematic issue that they call a finding. It is not the specific systems that may have had an issue that they identified through their scanning. That shifts around backwards and forward all over the place every year to year. But the ability to identify that we are not at 100% compliance with our security baselines, I believe they'll find that for a long time to come. And I think a bunch of those things are those particular issues. The second thing I object with is in a lot of cases, the things that they identify are just not that important relative to the other things we're fighting every day. And so we actually have to decide which of these things we're going to go attack versus which of the things that are lower priority for us. In a recent discussion we had, just to illustrate this, with the OIG on their findings, they showed us a chart of the number of findings over a period of time. That numbers game is not that important to us relative to, I want to get to the meat of exactly what they're finding and the import to securing the VA.
And I agree, and that's why I think it is so critical, Ms. Sherrill, that we put together this risk strategy that everyone is talking about, so that we have a good textbook, if you will, a framework that we're working through, consistent processes to make sure that we are addressing these issues. Mr. Bowman, your auditors performed a scan of some VA networks similar to what a hacker would do to probe for vulnerabilities. The VA didn't block the scan. Mr. DelBene's office contends that your auditors were using approved devices, and so their scan didn't reveal any problems. Were the devices approved or not, and what does the scan reveal?
So in connection with the FISMA audit, we do conduct vulnerability testing. What is approved is the specific point in time in the location where we perform scans. And what we were referring to in the report is that we were performing scans outside the scope of the agreement, if you will. And that's the difference, because VA understands that we're going to be performing scans, let's say, of the data centers. But when we decide to redirect our scans to maybe a medical center and it's not detected by VA, we want VA to demonstrate that they are watching the internal network for malicious traffic, and that wasn't being done in 2023. Now, in 2024, VA seemed to improve in that aspect because we did the similar test, and VA demonstrated they could see our malicious scans, and they were aware of it. So hats off to VA for the improvement in that area.
It seems to me it defeats the purpose of trying to identify where there's a deficiency if you're announcing, hey, I'm coming in here and I'm going to do this, as opposed to doing your scan and your security with something that has not been approved, has not been recognized. It basically what a white hat hacker does, and goes in and says, yeah, you got a problem here that we were able to penetrate this area. I yield back and I recognize Sheriff McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. DelBene, in January of 2023, OIT was recognized by the Department of Labor for developing an innovative cybersecurity apprenticeship program, allowing veterans to learn while they earn. How many veterans have utilized this apprenticeship, and how many of these veterans are now serving in VA's cybersecurity workforce?
Thank you for the question. I don't have the answer to that. I'm not sure if others here do.
I can actually take that. Thank you, ma'am. So we had a listing of 5. At present, we have 4 veterans that have been taking advantage of that. We are actually working through a 2-year program, apprenticeship program with them, and they will go through every aspect of our cybersecurity operations from beginning to end. And at the end, if they want to take the job, we will offer it to them, and we are looking to expand that to more and more veterans as we go forward. As a veteran myself, I think it's a great program that we've implemented and would love to see it expand.
Thank you. Mr. DelBene, recognizing the role of the veterans that veterans play in our society, I don't think it's outlandish to believe that many will be targeted by our adversaries, perhaps more than average citizens. In my opening, I highlighted a few instances where veterans may be specifically targeted into exposing their PII and their PHI or financial information. What steps is the VA taking to better support VA patients' cyber hygiene practices?
So we do a number of things. First, I agree with you in the concern. I have it as well. I think there's a few things to do. There's make sure that our systems are all where they interact with, veterans interact with the VA, have multi-factor authentication so that they actually have to validate they are who they say they are. And then general cyber hygiene. So for instance, there are attacks called man-in-the-middle attacks where you might get an email that says, hey, click here to connect to the VA system, and then it will redirect to their system and then flow back to ours. In most cases, the provisions that we have preclude that from actually working, and so we can block that sort of thing as well. But so that's making sure our systems are secure is number one. But then the second thing we do is we as an organization, broader in VA, outreach to veterans around things like what does cyber hygiene look like for them, because they're more interacting with other systems, computer systems, than they are in the VA in many cases. But we make sure our own systems are secure, and then we do outreach to educate veterans on what they should be doing to protect themselves as well.
Thank you. Also, when cybersecurity events do occur, how does the VA communicate those events externally and internally? And are VSOs brought along in the process to help disseminate resources and provide additional support to VA?
Let me pass that one to Ms. Sherrill, if I may.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. We have, I can't reach that button. Yes, we definitely communicate with the VSOs. Change Healthcare was a good example of partnering with Veterans Health Administration and making sure that we kept the VSOs as well as Congress and the White House all informed of activities and steps that we were taking throughout that process. It's super important for us to get the message out to veterans and out to our medical center directors. As I spoke with medical center directors throughout the year, one of the things they appreciated about Change Healthcare was that we were consistently messaging so that they would have answers at that local level as well. And it wasn't just a Washington, D.C. communication, but they were getting the message as well so they could communicate locally.
Wonderful. And also, Mr. DelBene, how do we future-proof your efforts in providing VA cybersecurity posture so the future CIOs can continue to enhance the efforts they've taken in the past?
I think a big part about it is having a highly technical trained cyber force that actually thinks about what the threat looks like today, but also extrapolates what it looks like in the future. So somebody who can think about things like AI and the impact that that will have on adversaries and their attacks, but also how we can use it to our benefit as well. And so we need a set of people that have those kinds of skills to be able to kind of think out of the box and think into the future as well. And then the second thing I'll say is there are a set, if you look at these systems on a risk basis, things like moving to zero trust fundamentally because of its direct, as Representative Rosendale said, that it basically assumes no trust across any system. Those are pretty strong, broad protections. They are also very complicated to implement and take a while to implement, or a long time to implement, and they can be costly. But if we get those core capabilities, that core ethos of don't trust anybody in our systems, we will be in better shape. But in this field, I never feel like we have enough. I think there's always going to be a strange attack that's going to come out that we weren't expecting. I tell my team, you need to make the distinction between, is this a good decision you're making and a bad outcome because we didn't think of something? Or is this a bad decision and a bad outcome because you weren't thinking logically about what the potential risks are and something bad happened? If we can always be in that space of, you want to be in the space of good decision, good outcome, but I never want to be in the situation of bad decision, bad outcome.
Thank you so much. I yield back.
I think that completes all our questioning, so I would yield to Ranking Member Sherrill McCormick for any closing remarks you have.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the testimony and answers from our witnesses this afternoon on such an interesting and critical topic. Our subcommittee hearings are often a robust conversation between parties. This was no different. I look forward to continuing our work with the VA, the Inspector General, and MITRE to ensure VA can make the most of its cybersecurity offerings. While we have highlighted the challenges that VA faces in its cybersecurity offerings, I would be remiss if I do not acknowledge the overarching trends facing the world today. The healthcare and financial services sectors are facing major cyber threats worldwide. VA is not immune to these challenges. We need to match, potentially even exceed, those industries in compensation and resources if we want VA to remain competitive. Only by investing in high-skilled staff, like our ISSOs, consistently enforcing cybersecurity standards across both VA and contractor-led systems, and collaborating with partners in implementing recommendations, best practices, will VA be successful. And that requires congressional input, collaboration, and support. To conclude, I'd like to highlight a note from MITRE's cybersecurity assessment. Despite what has been said here about deficiencies and needs for improvement, they note at the end of their report that they are strongly encouraged by the highly capable and mission-driven VA workforce. In each of our hearings here, we constantly hear of challenges facing VA's IT and aging IT infrastructure and its modernization efforts, but we often do not acknowledge the fantastic work of VA's highly skilled IT workforce. They deserve commendation for their incredible and often unnoticed work that they perform to keep all VA systems running for our veterans, caregivers, dependents, and the VA employees. Thank you so much to our workforce. Thank you for being here, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Sherrill McCormick. I want to thank all of the witnesses for joining us today. This has been an enlightening conversation. Your work protecting the data that VA is trusted to hold is critically important. It directly affects veterans and their families throughout the country. Cybersecurity is a sophisticated enterprise that can be completely undermined by the most elementary mistakes, accessing, without proper codes. One careless employee in the nearly 500,000 person organization can click the wrong link and trigger a breach that cascades through the networks. I appreciate the complexity of what the VA is trying to accomplish with zero trust architecture, but I'm deeply concerned about the debate over basic facts that the VA and its auditors continue to have. When you're still disputing what part of the organization is responsible for a system or how many endpoints are on a network, you're failing to close the vulnerabilities that they may have. As the FISMA audits and other cybersecurity reviews continue, I encourage you to collaborate and remember why we are all here. Veterans have earned VA health care and benefits. They expect the services to be world-class, and they also expect their personal information to be handled with the utmost care. As I stated earlier, we have to identify and address tomorrow's risks today. We can't address yesterday's risks tomorrow. And that's what this all boils down to. In a world of data breaches virtually every day, more and more Americans' personal information is being bought and sold on the dark web. Veterans expect the VA to do better. With that, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend the remarks and include extraneous material. Without objection, so ordered, the hearing is adjourned.